The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine courtyard of Thomas's Battersea School as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell adjusted her earpiece and scanned the area with practiced eyes. As one of the elite royal protection officers assigned to Prince George, she had developed an almost supernatural awareness of every detail in his environment. The 7-year-old prince was just another student here, but Sarah knew that beneath the facade of normalcy lay layers of security protocols that most people could never imagine. Sarah had been working royal protection for nearly 8 years, having transferred from Scotland Yard's counter-terrorism unit after proving herself during a high-profile kidnapping case involving a diplomat's child. Her superiors had noted her exceptional attention to detail and her ability to blend seamlessly into civilian environments while maintaining constant vigilance. These skills made her perfect for protecting the future king during his school years. The morning routine at Thomas's Battersea had become second nature to Sarah. She would arrive 30 minutes before Prince George, conducting a thorough sweep of the building and coordinating with the school's security team. The headmaster, Mr. Simon O'Malley, had been briefed on the protocols, though even he wasn't privy to all the security measures in place. Hidden cameras, plainclothes officers posing as maintenance workers, and sophisticated electronic monitoring systems all worked together to create an invisible shield around the young prince. Today felt different somehow. Sarah couldn't pinpoint exactly what was triggering her instincts, but 20 years in law enforcement had taught her to trust those subtle warning signals. The weather was typical for London. In October, overcast skies threatening rain, a crisp bite to the air that made parents hurry their children through the school gates. But something in the atmosphere felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Prince George arrived precisely at 8:15, as he did every Tuesday morning. His security detail was deliberately low-key. Just Sarah and one other officer, Detective Constable James Harper, who maintained a position near the main entrance. The prince's driver, a highly trained former SAS operative named Robert Fielding, would remain with the vehicle, engines running, ready for immediate departure if necessary. Sarah watched as George joined his classmates in the reception area, his backpack slung over one shoulder in the casual manner of any 8-year-old boy. His teacher, Mrs. Elizabeth Thornbury, greeted him with the same warm smile she offered all her students, though Sarah knew that Mrs. Thornbury had undergone extensive background checks and regular security briefings. The illusion of normalcy was carefully maintained, but every adult in that building understood the weight of their responsibility. The morning proceeded without incident through the first 2 periods. Sarah maintained her position in the school's security office, monitoring the feeds from various cameras while staying in constant communication with her team. She could see George in his mathematics lesson, working diligently on arithmetic problems, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, a habit that reminded Sarah of his father at that age, based on the briefing materials she'd studied. It was during the lunch break that everything changed. Mrs. Thornbury approached the security office with an expression that immediately put Sarah on high alert. The teacher's usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern, and she clutched something in her hand with white knuckles. "Detective Inspector Mitchell," Mrs. Thornbury said, her voice carefully controlled but edged with worry. "I need to show you something. I found it in Prince George's school bag when I was helping him look for his reading book." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Where is the prince now? In the dining hall with his classmates. Detective Constable Harper is maintaining visual contact. Mrs. Thornbury extended her hand, revealing a small piece of paper folded twice. This wasn't there this morning when he packed his bag. I'm certain of it. Sarah took the note with gloved hands, her mind already running through protocols. Any unauthorized item found in the prince's possession was treated as a potential security threat. She unfolded the paper carefully, noting its ordinary appearance, standard white writing paper, the kind found in any household or office. The message was brief, written in block letters with what appeared to be a common blue ballpoint pen. "The little prince's days are numbered. We know his every move. Cambridge will pay for their arrogance. This is just the beginning." Sarah's blood went cold. In 8 years of royal protection, she had dealt with her share of threats, but they usually came through official channels: angry letters to Buckingham Palace, suspicious packages intercepted by mail screeners, or online posts flagged by cybersecurity units. This was different. This was personal, specific, and it had somehow been placed directly into the prince's possession without detection. Mrs. Thornbury, I need you to think carefully. When exactly did you discover this note? The teacher wrung her hands nervously. About 10 minutes ago. George asked me to help him find his copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We were going through his bag together when I felt something crinkle at the bottom. At first, I thought it was just a piece of rubbish, but then I saw it was folded deliberately. Sarah immediately activated her radio. Control, this is Mitchell. Code yellow, I repeat, code yellow. Requesting immediate backup and threat assessment team to Thomas's Battersea. Unknown written threat discovered in subject's personal effects. Code yellow indicated a credible threat to the royal family member under protection. Within minutes, the Sarah knew the entire security apparatus would spring into action. Additional protection officers would be dispatched, the building would be quietly locked down, and the prince's parents would be notified immediately. Mrs. Thornbury, I need you to remain calm and act naturally. Can you think of anyone who might have had access to Prince George's bag today? Anyone who seemed out of place or behaved unusually? The teacher considered this carefully. The bag has been in our classroom all morning. The children hang their bags on hooks along the wall. Anyone could have approached them during our movement to assembly or when we went to the library. She paused, her face paling. Oh my goodness, the supply teacher. What supply teacher? Miss Davis couldn't come in today, family emergency. The agency sent a replacement, a young woman named Miss Cooper. She seemed perfectly qualified, had all the proper identification. But Mrs. Thornbury trailed off. But what? She was very interested in which bag belonged to which child. Said she wanted to learn their names quickly. I thought it was admirable dedication, but now Sarah's radio crackled to life. Mitchell, this is Control. Backup units are 2 minutes out. What's the current status of the subject? Subject is secure in the dining hall. I need immediate background check on a supply teacher named Cooper, first name unknown, placed by. Sarah looked questioningly at Mrs. Thornbury. Henderson Educational Supply Agency. The teacher provided quickly. Henderson Educational Supply Agency, Sarah continued into her radio. Also need review of all security footage from this morning, focusing on classroom area and bag storage. The next few minutes felt like hours. Sarah maintained visual contact with Prince George through the security monitors while coordinating the response. She could see him laughing with his friends, completely unaware that his world was about to change dramatically. The sight of his innocent enjoyment made the threatening note feel even more sinister. Detective Constable Harper's voice came through her earpiece. Mitchell, I've got eyes on a woman matching the supply teacher description leaving the building through the rear exit. Brown hair, navy blue coat, carrying a large handbag. Do not pursue. Maintain position with the subject. We need positive identification before any action. The backup team arrived with impressive speed and discretion. To anyone watching, they appeared to be routine maintenance workers and additional administrative staff. Sarah briefed the team leader, Inspector David Crawford, a veteran of Royal Protection with over 15 years' experience. The note's language suggests this isn't a random crank, Crawford observed after examining the message. The reference to Cambridge will pay indicates knowledge of the family's titles and recent activities. The phrase, we know his every move, suggests surveillance. Sarah nodded grimly. And the fact that it was placed directly in his bag means someone got very close. This represents a significant security breach. The threat assessment team worked quickly to establish whether there was immediate danger. Electronic sweeps of the building revealed no explosive devices or other physical threats. The note itself was bagged for forensic analysis, though Sarah doubted they would find useful fingerprints or DNA evidence. Meanwhile, the investigation into the mysterious supply teacher had already yielded disturbing results. Henderson Educational Supply Agency had no record of sending anyone named Cooper to Thomas's Battersea School. The woman who had spent the morning in Prince George's classroom was a complete unknown who had somehow bypassed the school's verification procedures. How did she get past security? Sarah asked Mr. O'Malley when he was briefed on the situation. The headmaster looked shaken. She presented what appeared to be legitimate credentials from Henderson Agency. We called the number on her identification, and someone confirmed she was their employee. The voice even knew details about Miss Davis's emergency absence. Someone's done their homework, Crawford observed. This level of preparation suggests a sophisticated operation. As the investigation continued, Sarah found herself studying the security footage from that morning. The woman calling herself Miss Cooper appeared confident and natural as she interacted with staff and students. She was approximately 30 years old, medium height, with shoulder-length brown hair and unremarkable features that would be easy to forget. Most troubling was how comfortable she seemed around children, suggesting this wasn't her first time in such an environment. The moment of truth came when the footage showed Miss Cooper approaching the bag storage area during the library period. She moved with purpose, quickly identifying Prince George's bag from among the dozen others hanging on the hooks. The placement of the note took less than 30 seconds, accomplished with the casual efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the action. She knew exactly which bag was his, Sarah muttered, watching the footage for the third time. This wasn't random. She came here specifically to deliver that message. The implications were staggering. Someone had infiltrated one of the most secure educational environments in London, assumed a false identity with convincing credentials, and gotten close enough to the future king to place a threatening message in his personal belongings. The security protocols that Sarah had believed were nearly impenetrable had been breached with apparent ease. Inspector Crawford made the decision that Sarah had been dreading, but knew was inevitable. "We're pulling him out. The threat level is too high to maintain normal operations." Sarah understood the necessity, but she also knew what this meant for Prince George. The careful balance between royal security and childhood normalcy was about to shift dramatically. The carefree boy she had been watching enjoy lunch with his friends was about to discover that being born into royalty came with a price that no child should have to pay. As the covert evacuation preparations began, Sarah took one last look at the threatening note, now sealed in an evidence bag. The simple piece of paper represented more than just words on a page. It was a declaration of war against everything she had sworn to protect. Someone out there had made this personal, and Sarah was determined to find out who. The investigation that would follow would uncover a web of deception and danger that reached far beyond a single threatening note. But in that moment, watching Prince George's innocent laughter through the security monitors, Sarah felt the weight of her responsibility more acutely than ever before. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The secure conference room at Kensington Palace buzzed with tension as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell spread the case files across the mahogany table. It had been 48 hours since the discovery of the threatening note, and what had initially appeared to be an isolated incident was rapidly evolving into something far more complex and dangerous. Kate Middleton sat at the head of the table, her usual composed public demeanor replaced by the fierce protectiveness of a mother whose child had been threatened. Despite her royal training and years in the public eye, nothing had prepared her for the reality of having her eldest son targeted by unknown enemies. Her hands remained steady as she examined the evidence, but Sarah could see the storm of emotions behind her carefully controlled expression. "Tell me everything," Kate said quietly, her voice carrying the authority that came with her position but tinged with maternal urgency. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." Seated around the table were the key figures in Prince George's security apparatus. Inspector David Crawford, the head of Royal Protection. Detective Chief Inspector Amanda Foster from Scotland Yard's Specialist Operations Unit. Dr. Marcus Webb, a criminal psychologist who specialized in threat assessment. And Colonel James Patterson, a former intelligence officer, now serving as security coordinator for the Cambridge family. Sarah began her briefing with the systematic thoroughness that had made her one of the most trusted officers in royal protection. The forensic analysis of the note has yielded several important clues. The paper is common printer stock available at any office supply store, but the ink contains trace elements that suggest it was written with a specific brand of pen, a Parker ballpoint, blue ink, manufactured within the last 6 months. She clicked a remote control, and a detailed photograph of the handwriting appeared on the wall-mounted screen. The block letters were written by someone who is naturally right-handed, but deliberately used their left hand to disguise their normal writing style. The pressure variations and slight tremor in certain letters indicate this deception. Dr. Webb leaned forward, studying the image intently. The language choices are particularly revealing. The phrase, "Cambridge will pay for their arrogance," suggests someone with a personal grievance against the family, not just anti-monarchist sentiment. The use of Little Prince is designed to be both dismissive and threatening. It reduces George to his royal status while emphasizing his vulnerability as a child. Kate's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What about this woman who placed the note? Have we identified her yet? Detective Chief Inspector Foster opened her tablet and brought up a series of photographs. We've made significant progress on that front. The woman calling herself Miss Cooper has been identified as Margaret Henley, age 32, a former primary school teacher from Manchester who lost her position 3 years ago due to complaints about inappropriate behavior towards students. The room fell silent as the implications of this information settled in. Sarah continued the briefing. Henley has no criminal record, but our investigation has revealed a pattern of concerning behavior. She was dismissed from 3 different schools over a 5-year period, always for boundary issues and what colleagues described as an unhealthy interest in high-profile students. Colonel Patterson pulled up additional files on his laptop. Our background check has uncovered something even more troubling. Henley has been living under multiple false identities for the past 18 months. She's used at least 4 different names, each with convincing documentation including teaching credentials, references, and even financial histories. Kate stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, her silhouette tense against the afternoon light. How is that possible? How can someone create multiple identities without being detected? Professional assistance, Foster replied grimly. The quality of these false documents suggests involvement with criminal organizations that specialize in identity fraud. This isn't something an individual could accomplish alone. Sarah activated her laptop and brought up a timeline on the main screen. We've been tracking Henley's movements over the past 6 months. She's been conducting surveillance on Prince George's activities with remarkable thoroughness. She attended public events where the family appeared, positioned herself near locations they frequent, and even applied for substitute teaching positions at 2 other schools in the area. The timeline showed a disturbing pattern of escalation. What had begun as casual observation had gradually become more focused and invasive. Henley had taken photographs of the school building, studied the security protocols, and even befriended staff members at local businesses frequented by royal protection officers. She's been planning this for months, Crawford observed. The level of preparation indicates this wasn't an impulsive act. Someone recruited her, trained her, and provided her with the resources to carry out this operation. Dr. Joan Sepri. Webb had been studying the psychological profile he'd developed based on the available evidence. Henley fits the pattern of what we call a compliant operative, someone with existing psychological vulnerabilities who can be manipulated by more sophisticated actors. Her dismissals from teaching positions, her financial difficulties, and her apparent social isolation would have made her an ideal target for recruitment. Kate turned back to face the room. Recruited by whom? What kind of organization are we dealing with? Colonel Patterson's expression was grave. Based on the sophistication of the operation and the quality of the false documentation, we believe we're looking at either a foreign intelligence service or a well-funded domestic extremist group. The message's reference to "we know his every move" suggests ongoing surveillance capabilities that go beyond what a lone individual could achieve. The investigation had already revealed several disturbing discoveries. Electronic surveillance sweeps of areas frequented by the royal family had detected sophisticated monitoring equipment that had been in place for weeks. License plate recognition systems had identified vehicles that had been following royal motorcades, always staying far enough back to avoid immediate detection but maintaining visual contact. Sarah brought up a map showing the locations where surveillance had been detected. The pattern suggests a network of at least 6 individuals working in coordination. They've been tracking the family's movements, studying security protocols, and identifying vulnerabilities in our protection procedures. The implications were staggering. What had initially appeared to be an isolated threat against Prince George was now revealed as part of a comprehensive intelligence operation targeting the entire Cambridge family. The threatening note was just the tip of an iceberg that ran much deeper than anyone had initially suspected. Kate's voice was steady but edged with steel. What are our options? How do we protect my family without completely destroying their ability to live normal lives? Crawford had been anticipating this question. We're implementing enhanced security protocols immediately. Prince George will be accompanied by additional protection officers, and we're installing upgraded security systems at all locations he frequents. The school has agreed to implement temporary restrictions on visitor access and staff verification procedures. Temporary? Kate raised an eyebrow. This doesn't sound like something that will be resolved quickly. Dr. Carr took a water stick against itself. Webb consulted his notes. Based on similar cases, operations of this sophistication typically indicate long-term planning and commitment. We're likely looking at months, possibly years of elevated threat levels. However, the fact that they've revealed their presence suggests they may be moving towards some kind of action phase. The psychological assessment painted a troubling picture. The perpetrators had demonstrated remarkable patience and planning ability, but the decision to place the threatening note suggested a shift in strategy. They were no longer content with passive surveillance and were beginning to make their presence known. Foster's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her expression growing darker. "We've just received intelligence from MI5. Similar surveillance patterns have been detected around other members of the royal family. This operation isn't limited to the Cambridge family." The room erupted in concerned conversation as the full scope of the threat became apparent. Sarah found herself thinking about the young boy she had been protecting, wondering how much of his childhood would be sacrificed to the demands of royal security. The carefree laughter she had observed just 2 days ago seemed like a memory from another lifetime. Kate returned to her seat, her royal composure reasserting itself despite the personal stakes involved. "I want regular briefings on the investigation's progress, and I want to know about any changes to my children's security arrangements before they're implemented. This is my family we're talking about, and I will not be kept in the dark." Colonel Patterson nodded respectfully. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. We're also recommending increased coordination with international intelligence services. If this is a foreign operation, we'll need all available resources to identify and neutralize the threat." The briefing continued for another hour, covering contingency plans, emergency protocols, and communication procedures. But beneath the professional discussion lay a more fundamental question that no one wanted to voice directly. How do you protect a child who is destined to live his entire life in the public eye from enemies who are willing to use that visibility against him? As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself studying Kate's face, noting the way worry lines had appeared around her eyes over the past 2 days. Being a royal protection officer meant she rarely saw the human side of the people she protected, but this crisis had stripped away the formal barriers between them. "Detective Inspector Mitchell," Kate said as the others began to file out. "A word, please." When they were alone, Kate's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "Tell me honestly, how much danger is my son in?" Sarah considered her words carefully. Her training emphasized the importance of providing accurate threat assessments without causing unnecessary panic. But Kate deserved the truth. "Your Royal Highness, we're dealing with a sophisticated and well-resourced adversary who has demonstrated the ability to penetrate our security measures. Until we identify and neutralize this threat, Prince George remains at significant risk." Kate nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "Then we do whatever is necessary to protect him, whatever it takes." As Sarah left Kensington Palace that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The investigation had revealed the scope and sophistication of the threat, but the underlying motivation remained unclear. Why target Prince George specifically? What did the perpetrators hope to achieve? And, most importantly, what would their next move be? The threatening note had been just the beginning, a declaration of intent that had set larger forces in motion. Sarah knew that somewhere out there, Margaret Henley and her unknown associates were planning their next step, and the safety of the future king hung in the balance. The safe house in Surrey appeared unremarkable from the outside, a modest Victorian cottage surrounded by well-maintained gardens and a white picket fence that spoke of middle-class respectability. But Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell knew that behind its ordinary facade lay one of the most sophisticated criminal operations she had ever encountered. It had been 6 weeks since the discovery of the threatening note in Prince George's school bag, and the investigation had taken several unexpected turns. What had begun as a single threat against a young royal had evolved into the exposure of an international conspiracy with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of British society. Sarah adjusted her earpiece as she crouched behind a hedgerow, watching the cottage through night vision binoculars. The surveillance operation had been in place for 3 days, ever since intelligence sources had identified this location as a key operational base for the group calling itself the Republican Dawn. The name itself was revealing. Not anti-monarchist in the traditional sense, but something far more radical and dangerous. "Alpha team in position." whispered Detective Constable James Harper through the radio. He was positioned on the cottage's eastern flank with two other armed officers, their movements invisible in the pre-dawn darkness. "Beta team ready," came the response from Detective Chief Inspector Amanda Foster, who had assumed field command of the operation. Her team was covering the rear of the property, where thermal imaging had detected what appeared to be an underground tunnel system. The intelligence that had led them here had come from an unexpected source. Margaret Henley, the woman who had infiltrated Prince George's school, had been captured 3 weeks earlier during a failed attempt to place surveillance equipment near Kensington Palace. Under interrogation, she had initially maintained her innocence, but the psychological pressure of isolation and the weight of evidence had eventually broken her resolve. Dr. Marcus Webb had conducted the interrogation with the skill that had made him one of the most respected criminal psychologists in Europe. Rather than using aggressive tactics, he had appealed to Henley's obvious psychological instability and her growing realization that she had been manipulated by her handlers. "They promised me money," Henley had finally admitted during her fourth interrogation session. "My teaching career was over, I had debts, and they offered me a way out. All I had to do was get close to the royal children," but as Webb had suspected, Henley was merely a small part of a much larger operation. The Republican Dawn had recruited dozens of individuals like her, people with legitimate skills but personal vulnerabilities that could be exploited. They had been placed in positions throughout London's educational, hospitality, and service sectors, creating an intelligence network that could monitor royal activities with unprecedented detail. "The cottage showed signs of activity 2 hours ago," Sarah reported quietly into her radio. "3 individuals entered through the front door, and thermal imaging suggests at least 4 more people are inside. The decision to raid the safe house had not been taken lightly." Colonel James Patterson had argued for continued surveillance to gather more intelligence, but the risk of the group detecting their investigation had grown too great. Intercepted communications suggested that the Republican Dawn was preparing for what they called Phase 2 of their operation, something that went far beyond surveillance and threats. Sarah's radio crackled softly. "Control to all units. We have confirmation that the primary target is inside the building. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell has been positively identified through facial recognition." Dr. Hartwell's involvement had been the most shocking discovery of the investigation. A respected academic from Cambridge University, she had published numerous papers on constitutional law and had even advised government committees on matters relating to the monarchy's role in modern Britain. Her transformation from respected scholar to terrorist leader had caught everyone by surprise. The investigation had revealed that Hartwell's radicalization had been a gradual process spanning nearly 5 years. Her academic work had brought her into contact with various Republican movements across Europe, and somewhere along the way, her intellectual opposition to monarchy had evolved into something far more dangerous. She had used her academic credentials and social connections to recruit others to her cause, creating a network that combined ideological commitment with professional expertise. "The intelligence suggests they're planning something for next week." Foster's voice came through the radio. "We can't afford to wait any longer." Sarah checked her watch. It was 4:47 a.m., the time when human alertness was at its lowest. The raid had been timed to maximize the element of surprise while minimizing the risk of civilian casualties in the surrounding area. "All units, this is Control. Operation Roundup is authorized. Execute. Execute, execute." The cottage erupted into controlled chaos as the assault teams moved simultaneously from multiple directions. Sarah watched through her binoculars as the front door splintered under the impact of the battering ram, followed immediately by the distinctive pop of stun grenades designed to disorient the occupants without causing permanent harm. "Armed police, get down on the ground. Hands where we can see them." The shouts echoed through the quiet countryside as the teams poured into the building. Sarah maintained her position as Overwatch, her role to monitor for any attempts to escape through windows or concealed exits that surveillance might have missed. Alpha Team has secured the ground floor. 5 subjects in custody, no resistance. Beta Team has found the tunnel entrance. Appears to lead to an outbuilding about 50 meters to the rear. Sarah shifted her position to get a better view of the outbuilding Foster had mentioned. Through her binoculars, she could see it was larger than it had appeared during their initial reconnaissance, probably a converted barn or storage facility. If it was connected to the main cottage by underground tunnels, it could contain additional operatives or, more concerning, weapons and equipment. This is Alpha Team. We've found something you need to see. The cottage contains what appears to be a comprehensive intelligence center, computer equipment, surveillance gear, and detailed files on multiple royal family members. The discovery confirmed what the investigation had long suspected. The Republican Dawn was conducting far more than simple surveillance. Sarah could see officers carrying sealed evidence bags from the cottage, each one potentially containing pieces of a puzzle that had taken months to assemble. Beta Team has entered the outbuilding. Jesus Christ Control, we need the bomb disposal unit here immediately. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. The presence of explosive devices elevated the threat level exponentially and suggested that the Republican Dawn was indeed planning something far more serious than symbolic protests or threatening notes. Foster's voice cut through the radio chatter with professional calm. All units maintain positions. EOD is en route with estimated arrival in 12 minutes. No one approaches the outbuilding until it's been cleared. The wait stretched endlessly as dawn began to break over the Surrey countryside. Sarah could see additional police vehicles arriving, their blue lights flashing silently in the growing daylight. The explosive ordnance disposal team worked with methodical precision, their robot units probing the outbuilding while human technicians analyzed what they found. Control, this is EOD leader. The devices appear to be sophisticated but stable. We're dealing with what looks like professionally manufactured explosives, not homemade materials. Estimate 1 hour for full clearance. Professionally manufactured explosives meant international connections and significant financial resources. Sarah found herself wondering how deep this conspiracy reached and how many other cells might be operating undetected. Alpha Team has Dr. Hartwell in custody. She's requesting to speak with the senior investigating officer. Sarah wasn't surprised. Academic types often believed they could negotiate their way out of situations through intellectual argument and persuasion, but she was curious about what Hartwell might reveal about the scope of their operation. Foster made the decision to conduct a preliminary interview on site before formal processing began. Sarah was invited to observe, given her role as the officer who had first detected the threat against Prince George. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell was not what Sarah had expected. Rather than the wild-eyed fanatic she had imagined, Hartwell appeared to be a composed, articulate woman in her mid-50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Even in handcuffs and facing serious terrorism charges, she maintained an air of intellectual dignity. "Detective Chief Inspector Foster, I presume," Hartwell said as she was seated in the mobile command unit that had been brought to the scene. "I've been expecting this conversation for some time." "Have you indeed?" Foster replied dryly. "In that case, you'll understand why we're here and what charges you're facing. I understand that you've discovered our operation, yes, but I suspect you don't fully comprehend what you've stumbled into." Hartwell's tone was that of a professor addressing a particularly slow student. "What you call terrorism, we call patriotism. What you call conspiracy, we call constitutional reform." Sarah leaned forward, studying Hartwell's face. Constitutional reform doesn't usually involve threatening 8-year-old children. For the first time, Hartwell's composed facade cracked slightly. Prince George was never in any real danger. The note was simply a way of demonstrating that your security measures aren't as effective as you believe. "We needed to get your attention. You have it now," Foster said grimly. "So why don't you tell us exactly what your group was planning? What is Phase 2? Hartwell considered this question carefully, and Sarah could see her weighing her options. Academic intellectuals were often motivated by a desire to explain their reasoning, to demonstrate the logic of their position even when facing defeat. "The monarchy is an anachronism," Hartwell began, her voice taking on the cadence of a lecture hall. "It represents everything that's wrong with British society: inherited privilege, social inequality, the perpetuation of class distinctions that should have died out centuries ago. But people won't see this as long as they're charmed by pretty princesses and cute royal children." "So you decided to change their minds through terrorism?" Sarah asked. "Through demonstration," Hartwell corrected. "We needed to show people that the royal family isn't untouchable, that their security can be breached, that they're as vulnerable as anyone else. Once people understand that the monarchy can't even protect itself, they'll begin to question why it should protect them. The psychology was twisted but internally consistent. The Republican Dawn wasn't trying to harm the royal family directly. They were trying to undermine public confidence in the institution of monarchy itself by demonstrating its weaknesses. "The explosives in the outbuilding," Foster continued. What were they intended for? Symbolic targets. Empty buildings. Historic sites associated with the monarchy but without human casualties. We're not murderers, Inspector. We're revolutionaries. Sarah found herself thinking about the threatening note that had started this entire investigation. The message had been designed not just to frighten but to demonstrate capability. It was a calling card, a way of announcing their presence and intentions. "How many other cells are operating?" Foster demanded. Hartwell smiled slightly, and Sarah realized they weren't going to get easy answers about the full scope of the conspiracy. That would be telling, wouldn't it? The interview continued for another hour, but Hartwell revealed little additional information about the organization's structure or future plans. She was clearly the intellectual leader of the group, but Sarah suspected that operational control lay elsewhere, with people who had remained safely in the shadows. As the suspects were transported to London for formal processing, Sarah found herself troubled by the implications of what they had discovered. The Republican Dawn represented a new kind of threat, sophisticated, well-funded, and motivated by ideology rather than personal grievance. They had demonstrated the ability to penetrate royal security and recruit operatives from respectable backgrounds. Most concerning was the realization that they had only caught one cell of what appeared to be a larger network. Hartwell's confidence suggested that other groups were still operational, planning their own operations against the monarchy. Sarah's radio crackled with a message from headquarters. "Mitchell, report to Kensington Palace immediately. The royal family needs to be briefed on today's developments." As she drove back toward London, Sarah thought about Prince George and the other royal children whose lives had been forever changed by this conspiracy. The carefree childhood that she had been working to protect was receding further into memory, replaced by the harsh realities of living under constant threat. The encrypted files recovered from the Surrey safe house painted a picture so disturbing that Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the Republican Dawn conspiracy. But 3 weeks had passed since the raid, and each day brought new revelations that expanded the scope of what they were dealing with, far beyond anyone's initial estimates. Sarah sat in the secure briefing room at New Scotland Yard, surrounded by representatives from MI5, MI6, and the Anti-Terrorism Command. The walls were lined with photographs, documents, and connection charts that resembled a spiderweb of conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of British society. "The financial trail has been the most revealing aspect of our investigation," announced Chief Inspector David Reeves from the Economic Crime Unit. His team had been working around the clock to trace the money that had funded the Republican Dawn's operations, and what they had discovered was both shocking and deeply troubling. "The group received over £2 million in funding over the past 18 months, Reeves continued, clicking through a presentation that showed bank transfers, shell companies, and financial instruments designed to obscure the source of the money. "The funds came through a complex network of offshore accounts, but we've managed to trace them back to their ultimate source." Sarah leaned forward, knowing that this information would be crucial to understanding the true scope of the threat they were facing. The sophisticated surveillance equipment, the false documents, the recruitment of operatives like Margaret Henley, all of it required substantial financial resources that suggested backing from a major organization. The money originated from the Sovereign Citizens Foundation, a nominally charitable organization based in Switzerland, Reeves revealed. On the surface, they fund academic research into governmental structures and constitutional reform. In reality, they're a front for foreign intelligence services seeking to destabilize democratic institutions across Europe. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This was no longer a domestic terrorism case involving disgruntled Republicans. They were dealing with a foreign-sponsored operation designed to undermine the British monarchy and, by extension, the stability of the British political system itself. Commander Patricia Wells from MI5 took over the briefing. "Our investigation has identified similar operations targeting royal families in Spain, Sweden, and the Netherlands. The pattern is consistent. Recruit domestic dissidents, provide them with resources and training, and then use them to conduct operations that appear to be homegrown terrorism but are actually part of a coordinated international campaign. Sarah thought about Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, still in custody and maintaining her stance that she was a patriot fighting for constitutional reform. Did she know she was being used as a pawn in a foreign intelligence operation, or had she genuinely believed she was leading a domestic Republican movement? The Sovereign Citizens Foundation is believed to be a front for Russian intelligence services, Wells continued. Their goal isn't necessarily to eliminate the monarchy. It's to create enough instability and public doubt to weaken Western democratic institutions. A British monarchy under constant threat, unable to fulfill its constitutional role effectively, serves their strategic interests perfectly. The revelation reframed everything they had discovered. The threatening note placed in Prince George's school bag hadn't been the work of domestic extremists. It had been part of a sophisticated psychological warfare campaign designed to terrorize the royal family and undermine public confidence in their security arrangements. Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Inspector Crawford. New intelligence had emerged from the ongoing interrogation of the suspects captured in the Surrey raid, and it suggested that the conspiracy was even more extensive than they had realized. "We need to discuss the school infiltration in more detail," said Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been conducting psychological evaluations of the captured operatives. Margaret Henley wasn't the only one. "Our analysis suggests that Republican Dawn managed to place operatives in at least 6 schools attended by children of prominent families." The scope of the surveillance network was staggering. Evidence of the past continuity was given to many senior classes, mostly classical Ts, so far after Dr. Speaker did know any kind of Caesar offering a process. President of L'Oreal Lentino Brooks' medical disposition would have been under decisive testimony and most available dispositions. "The operational plan we've reconstructed goes far beyond symbolic demonstrations," Webb continued, as Phase 2 involved simultaneous operations designed to create a crisis of confidence in the government's ability to protect its most important citizens. They were planning to demonstrate that if they could reach royal children, they could reach anyone. Commander Wells brought up a new slide showing intercepted communications between Republican Dawn cells. "We've identified at least 3 other operational groups that remain active. They're aware that we've compromised the Surrey cell, and they've gone to ground. But our signals intelligence suggests they're preparing to accelerate their timeline." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "They're going to move before we can roll up the entire network." "That's our assessment as well," Wells confirmed. "We believe they have approximately 1 week before they either execute their remaining operations or abandon them entirely and extract their operatives." The pressure in the room was palpable. They were racing against time to prevent attacks that could target any number of high-profile families, including other members of the royal family who hadn't been their primary focus until now. "What about Prince George specifically?" Sarah asked. "Are we confident he's no longer a target?" Webb consulted his notes. The psychological profile suggests that the focus on Prince George was always tactical rather than personal. He represented the most vulnerable, high-value target, a child with substantial symbolic importance but relatively light security compared to his parents. Now that we've exposed their capabilities, they're likely to shift to targets that offer better operational security. This was cold comfort. While Prince George might no longer be the primary target, the threat had expanded to encompass his siblings, his cousins, and children throughout the upper levels of British society. Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent communication from the command center. "All units, we have reports of suspicious activity near Eton College. Possible surveillance team in position. Requesting immediate response." The mention of Eton sent a shock through the briefing room. Prince William and Prince Harry had both attended the prestigious school, and several children of current government ministers were enrolled there. If Republican Dawn was conducting reconnaissance at Eton, it suggested their target list included the teenage children of the British elite. "This could be our opportunity," Commander Wells said, reaching for her secure phone. "If we can catch them in the act of surveillance, we might be able to follow them back to their operational base." Sarah found herself thinking about the complexity of the operation they were facing. The Republican Dawn had demonstrated remarkable patience and planning ability, conducting surveillance for months before making their first move. Now, under pressure from law enforcement, they were being forced to accelerate their operations, which might make them more vulnerable to detection. "I need to brief the royal family on these developments," Sarah said, gathering her files. The discovery that Prince George had been targeted as part of an international conspiracy would be even more disturbing to his parents than the original threat. The drive to Kensington Palace gave Sarah time to think about how much the investigation had changed since that morning when Mrs. Thornbury had shown her a simple folded piece of paper. What had seemed like a straightforward threat case had evolved into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about national security and the safety of British institutions. Kate was waiting for her in the same secure conference room where they had first discussed the threat assessment. But this time, Prince William was also present, his face grave with the knowledge that his family was caught up in something far larger than anyone had initially understood. "You look like you have news we won't want to hear," William said as Sarah entered the room. "I'm afraid that's accurate, Your Royal Highness." Sarah spread her briefing materials on the table. "We've discovered that the threat against Prince George is part of a foreign intelligence operation targeting multiple royal families across Europe." She walked them through the financial trail, the international connections, and the scope of the surveillance network that had been monitoring their family's activities. Kate's face grew increasingly pale as the full implications became clear. "You're telling me that a foreign government has been watching my children?" Kate's voice was carefully controlled, but Sarah could hear the fury beneath the royal composure. "Not just watching. They've been conducting a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to identify vulnerabilities in your security arrangements and undermine public confidence in the monarchy's ability to protect itself." William leaned back in his chair, processing the information. "The goal isn't to harm us directly, it's to make us appear vulnerable and ineffective." "Exactly. By demonstrating that they can breach your security, place operatives near your children, and obtain detailed intelligence about your private lives, they're trying to create a narrative that the monarchy is both a security risk and unable to perform its constitutional functions effectively." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours as Sarah briefed them on the ongoing investigation and the enhanced security measures being implemented. But beneath the professional discussion lay a more personal reality. The Cambridge family's life had been forever changed by forces beyond their control. As Sarah prepared to leave, Kate had one final question. "Detective Inspector, in your professional opinion, when will this be over? When can my family feel safe again?" Sarah had been dreading this question because she didn't have a good answer. "Your Royal Highness, we're dealing with state-sponsored actors with substantial resources and long-term strategic goals. Even if we dismantle this particular network, others may take its place. The threat level may never return to what it was before." The weight of this reality settled over the room like a shroud. Prince George and his siblings would grow up in a world where their every movement was monitored not just by their own security services, but potentially by hostile foreign intelligence agencies seeking to exploit any weakness or vulnerability. As Sarah drove away from Kensington Palace that evening, she reflected on how a simple piece of paper had led to the exposure of an international conspiracy. But she also knew that their work was far from finished. Somewhere in London, other Republican Dawn operatives were preparing for their next move, and the safety of the royal family hung in the balance. 6 months after the discovery of the threatening note in Prince George's school bag, Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell stood in the witness box at the Old Bailey, delivering testimony that would conclude one of the most significant national security cases in recent British history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, security officials, and legal observers who understood they were witnessing the culmination of an investigation that had exposed vulnerabilities at the very heart of the British establishment. The defendant's dock held 7 individuals, including Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell and Margaret Henley, all facing charges of conspiracy to commit terrorism, espionage, and threats against the royal family. But Sarah knew that these 7 represented only a fraction of the network that had been dismantled over the preceding months. "Detective Inspector Mitchell," the prosecution counsel began, "please tell the court about the moment you first realized the scope of what you were dealing with." Sarah looked toward the public gallery, where she could see colleagues who had worked alongside her throughout the investigation. The past 6 months had been a relentless pursuit of leads that stretched across multiple countries and involved coordination with intelligence services throughout Europe. "The turning point came when we discovered the financial trail," Sarah testified. What had initially appeared to be a domestic terrorism case revealed itself to be part of a coordinated international operation designed to destabilize democratic institutions across Europe. The evidence presented during the trial had painted a comprehensive picture of the Republican Dawn conspiracy. Working with intelligence services from across the continent, British authorities had uncovered a network of front organizations, sleeper agents, and strategic operations that targeted royal families, government officials, and other symbols of democratic stability. The investigation had revealed that the threatening note placed in Prince George's school bag was just one element of a campaign called Operation Succession, a multi-year effort to create crises of confidence in European monarchies and democratic governments. Similar operations had been uncovered in Spain, where surveillance equipment was found near schools attended by royal children, and in Sweden, where operatives had been placed within the royal household staff. The defendant Hartwell maintained throughout her interrogations that she believed she was leading a domestic Republican movement. Sarah continued. Our investigation suggests that she was deliberately recruited and manipulated by foreign intelligence services who exploited her genuine ideological beliefs for their own strategic purposes. Dr. Webb's psychological assessment of Hartwell had revealed a complex picture of a brilliant academic whose legitimate concerns about social inequality had been carefully nurtured and redirected by sophisticated handlers. She had been approached at academic conferences, invited to participate in research projects, and gradually drawn into a network that she believed was committed to peaceful constitutional reform. The prosecution had presented evidence showing how Hartwell's handlers had systematically isolated her from mainstream academic circles while introducing her to increasingly radical ideas and influential contacts. By the time she realized the true nature of the organization she was involved with, she was so deeply compromised that extraction seemed impossible. Margaret Henley's case was even more tragic. The former teacher had been recruited during a period of personal crisis, when she was struggling with unemployment and mounting debts. The promise of steady income and meaningful work had blinded her to the true nature of what she was being asked to do. Ms. Henley was what intelligence services call a useful innocent, Sarah testified. She genuinely believed she was conducting educational consulting work while occasionally observing and reporting on school security procedures. She wasn't fully aware that her reports were being used to develop targeting packages for potential operations against royal children. The trial had also revealed the broader context of what had become known as the succession plot. Intelligence agencies had identified at least 12 similar operations targeting democratic institutions across Europe and North America. The goal wasn't necessarily to eliminate specific individuals, but to create an atmosphere of insecurity and incompetence around democratic leaders and institutions. Judge Sir Michael Hartington had followed the proceedings with obvious concern about the national security implications. During his summation, he noted that the case represented a new form of warfare against democratic societies, one that seeks to undermine public confidence through demonstration of institutional vulnerability rather than direct attack. The sentences were substantial. Dr. Hartwell received 15 years for conspiracy to commit terrorism and espionage. Margaret Henley, whose cooperation had been valuable to the investigation, received 8 years. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with authorities. But Sarah knew that the legal proceedings represented only the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. The intelligence operations that had been uncovered continued to reverberate through government and security circles, leading to comprehensive reviews of protection protocols and international cooperation agreements. Following the trial, Sarah was invited to a private meeting at Kensington Palace. It had been several months since she had seen the Cambridge family, and she was curious about how they had adapted to the enhanced security measures that had become their new reality. Prince William and Kate received her in the same conference room where they had first learned about the true scope of the threat against their family. But the atmosphere was markedly different. There was a sense of resolution and, perhaps more importantly, a understanding that they had survived a test of their resilience and security arrangements. Detective Inspector Mitchell, William began, we wanted to thank you personally for everything you've done to protect our family and expose this conspiracy. Kate nodded, her expression warm but still carrying traces of the strain the family had endured. More than that, we wanted to ask about Prince George specifically. How much does he understand about what happened? Sarah had been wondering about this question herself. Throughout the investigation, great care had been taken to shield the young prince from the details of the threat against him. But children were remarkably perceptive about changes in their environment. Based on my observations and discussions with his teachers, Prince George is aware that his security arrangements have changed, but he doesn't appear to understand the specific nature of the threat, Sarah replied. Children are remarkably adaptable, and he seems to have adjusted to the enhanced protection protocols without significant psychological impact. This had been one of the most challenging aspects of the entire operation, maintaining Prince George's sense of normalcy while implementing security measures that were necessarily intrusive. The 8-year-old prince now traveled with additional protection officers, attended school under enhanced surveillance, and lived within a security bubble that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. The child psychologists we've consulted believe that maintaining his regular activities and friendships is crucial for his development, Kate added. We're determined that he shouldn't lose his childhood because of these threats. Sarah admired their commitment to preserving their son's well-being while accepting the reality of their changed circumstances. The investigation had revealed that Prince George would likely live his entire life under some level of threat from hostile foreign intelligence services and domestic extremist groups. I have some positive news to share, Sarah said, opening her briefing folder. The enhanced security protocols we've implemented have been adopted as the new standard for royal protection across Europe. Your family's experience has led to improvements that will benefit royal families throughout the continent. The cooperation between European intelligence services that had been forged during the investigation had created new capabilities for detecting and disrupting similar operations. The Republican Dawn conspiracy had inadvertently strengthened the very institutions it had sought to weaken. William leaned forward with interest. What about the broader network? Are we confident that other cells have been neutralized? We've had significant success, Sarah confirmed. 7 additional cells were rolled up across 4 countries, and we've disrupted the financial networks that supported their operations. The Sovereign Citizens Foundation has been designated a terrorist organization, and several of its key personnel have been arrested or expelled from their host countries. But she also had to be honest about the limitations of their success. However, we're dealing with state-sponsored actors who have substantial resources and long-term strategic patience. Other organizations will likely emerge to replace the ones we've disrupted. The conversation continued for another hour, covering ongoing security arrangements, intelligence sharing with international partners, and the long-term implications for royal protection. But beneath the professional discussion lay a more personal reality. The Cambridge family had been forever changed by their encounter with international espionage. As the meeting concluded, Kate had one final question. Detective Inspector, do you think Prince George will ever be able to live a truly normal life? Sarah considered her words carefully. Your Royal Highness, Prince George was never going to live what most people would consider a normal life. He was born to be king, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. What we've done is ensure that he can fulfill that destiny safely, surrounded by people who are committed to protecting him and the institution he represents. As Sarah left Kensington Palace for what she knew would likely be the last time in her current role, she reflected on how much had changed since that October morning when Mrs. Thornberry had shown her a simple piece of paper. The threatening note had seemed like an isolated incident, but it had led to the exposure of a conspiracy that challenged fundamental assumptions about national security in the modern era. 3 weeks later, Sarah received notification of her promotion to Detective Chief Inspector and her assignment to a new position within the Royal Protection Command. Her experience with the Republican Dawn conspiracy had made her one of the leading experts on threats against the royal family, and her services would be needed as security arrangements continued to evolve. Prince George returned to Thomas's Battersea School for the new academic year, but with security arrangements that reflected the new reality of his situation. Additional protection officers, enhanced surveillance systems, and revised protocols all worked together to create a protective environment that was as unobtrusive as possible while remaining effective. The young prince adapted to his changed circumstances with the resilience that children often display in the face of adult complexities they don't fully understand. He continued to excel in his studies, maintain friendships with his classmates, and participate in the school activities that were so important to his development. But Sarah knew that somewhere in the files of hostile intelligence services, Prince George's name remained on target lists and operational planning documents. The threats that had been disrupted would be replaced by new ones, requiring constant vigilance from the men and women charged with protecting the future king. The discovery of a simple, threatening note had revealed the vulnerability of even the most protected individuals in British society. But it had also demonstrated the resilience of democratic institutions and the dedication of those who serve to protect them. In the end, the Republican Dawn conspiracy had achieved the opposite of its intended effect. Rather than weakening the monarchy, it had strengthened the resolve of those committed to defending it. As Sarah began her new role, she carried with her the knowledge that Prince George's safety represented something larger than the protection of one child. It symbolized society's commitment to preserving the institutions and values that had been carefully built over centuries, and which remained under constant threat from those who sought to destroy them through fear, intimidation, and violence. The investigation was closed, but the work of protection continued, as it always would, as long as there were those who sought to harm what others had sworn to defend.